Okay, so I'm pretty sure a good chunk of you know me pretty well for a long time. And when you think of me, you probably think of me like as a very hyper, energetic kid. And some of you might honestly think I'm like special ed by the way I act, but I mean, that's fair. And like when you look at me, you'll probably like you recognize, like, oh yeah, Ronaldo guy. You know, he thinks he's Batman, all that ego, whatever. And really, it looks like I live a pretty happy life. In reality, that's only like my shell. That's not exactly like who I really am. I mean, there's a lot that goes up in here that I don't really talk about, but I thought this would be a great way to like kind of represent what goes up in here and just describe like the shell and why I don't express my emotions as much. So, growing up, you know, it was alright. I had a good childhood, I would say. The thing is, you know, like a typical Mexican household, you know, it's not always gonna be perfect growing up. My parents would argue quite a bit, I'm not gonna lie, and as a kid, you know, your brain sees that and doesn't understand what's really going around you. So when a kid sees that, you know, it kind of traumatizes them, I would say, because that's what happened to me. So there were a lot of times where my dad would argue with my mom, and he would threaten to leave the house. And then there was one day where they got really close to separating, and we were on the brink of moving to Mexico. And that to this day, I mean, we're fine now, but to this day, I still remember that night pretty well. Lately, I've been dealing with a lot of stuff. So what that causes is it causes my brain to overthink. So my question is, how do you turn overthinking into a coping mechanism? Well, just a quick show of hands. How many of you remember when I was sick, like sophomore year, and I was gone pretty much the whole semester? Yeah, I mean, so I don't come out and say this because, as I've told those of you who know about my illness, it comes down from my mom's side of the family. But what I have is a chronic illness, and basically it deals with a lot of stomach stuff. So my stomach builds up bacteria pretty fast, and once it gets to a point where it has too much bacteria, then I pretty much stop functioning like my body, and I have to take a lot of prescriptions for that, and it takes days for them to take effect depending on how bad it is. And so as of lately, what's been going through my mind is, I don't know how many of you are aware, but my grandpa was killed lately. That's why I was gone for the 2 weeks while I was over in Mexico. I'm sure some of you who don't know probably were like, yeah, he's on vacation. I wasn't. In fact, it was pretty depressing over there. And being back over here, I don't know if I'm still depressed or not, but like, I'm kind of just going through it. So what my book suggested, which was 23 Ways to Stop Overthinking by Nick Trenton, was you pretty much just have to breathe. You know, it talked about a stress releasing method where it talked about the 4 A's, which I don't remember all 4 of them, but the one that really stuck out to me was avoid. You just got to try and avoid like the things that you can control, and those that you can't control, then, you know, it is what it is, you know. So like with this thing with my grandpa, I mean, I can control that, so it hurts, but like I'm just letting it play out. And this whole thing with the ego that I talk about, I mean, it kind of just helps me like combat all this stuff. And that also leads into like why I choose the idols that I have. So like with Ronaldo and Batman, it's not just because I think they are the greatest, it's because personally I find a lot of relevance and relation to them outside of why I think they're the best. So like, for example, you already know that I like Batman a lot, but it goes deeper than just thinking he's cool and stuff, you know. Like, if you really dig into his character, you'll see he's actually depressed. Like, he has chronic depression. You know, he overthinks. That's why he does what he does. You know, as a kid, he was traumatized from his parents being killed. So he has a lot going on in his head. Yeah, you'll notice he still keeps on going. You know, I mean, every night, whether he's injured or whatever, whether he hasn't eaten, he hasn't sleeping, you know, he's still going. And I think that just really relates to me, because there are days where, you know, it's hard. You know, we're all human. We're not always going to be happy. Not every day is going to be as good as the last one was. You know, you just got to take your wins like you take your losses. So if I have a bad day, you know, I'll just tell myself that the only one who's better than me is me tomorrow. And I just keep on going like that. And then as for Ronaldo, that's kind of where the whole ego comes from, because in 2008, when he gave my favorite performance of all time, essentially he wasn't mentally stable, and even though he still showed up, he lost his father during the World Cup, and he kept playing. And then there was one day when he was on his way to training, he got into a car crash, and it was a very violent one. His car was completely trashed, but 20 minutes later after the accident, instead of going to the hospital, he was at the training field. So I think that just shows a lot of discipline, and it shows you that, you know, when life knocks you down, you just got to get up faster and attack it even harder. And then another thing that has been on my mind lately is that with all this going on with my grandpa, you know, it's kind of just been one thing after another. So my grandpa died, and then this person that I thought I could trust, turned out that I couldn't trust him, and I've known them for about 5 years. And so it kind of hurt knowing that I trusted this person and they weren't really a trustworthy person. And sometimes the past comes back to me, and once I start, I basically can't stop thinking. And so that's where my article comes in, which is How to Stop Your Brain from Going into a Downward Spiral by Sarah Lee. Essentially, it talks about the same things as my book did about how to stop overthinking, but there was a test in there that a scientist did with marshmallows. So he pretty much took kids, and he told them, you can either get one marshmallow now, or if you wait a little longer, you can have two. And it showed that those who waited essentially did better on their tests, and they performed mentally better than the ones who took the marshmallow right away. And what that showed me was that what the storms I'm going through right now will not define what I get in the future. So the way I like to see it is, God gives his toughest battles to his toughest warriors. So I just try and put that in my brain. I just try and keep going. And yeah, so I have this mentor at the Y. I always talk about him. And that's because there's also a saying where God removes to replace. And I really truly believe that, because last year I lost a person, and you know, I was in a pretty downward spiral. You know, I just kept on going down and down and down, and there was no way for me to stop like overthinking. And then I met this guy, and at first I thought he was, you know, like a punk, because he always had a crabby face. He never said hi to me. I was like, all right. But then I met him, and he turned out to be the greatest guy. And I asked him this myself personally. I'm like, how do you stop overthinking? And he was like, there's just no way you can stop thinking, because you're always going to be thinking. Even when you think you're not thinking, you are thinking. So his suggestion was just to breathe. And I guess I'm kind of still figuring it out. But as I look back at like the movie that I chose, which was the 2022 Robert Pattinson movie, where he plays as Batman, it kind of just shows like the two pathways I can choose. So what Batman did with his trauma is he turned it around and he uses it for good, while as the villain, the Riddler, he kind of goes through the same thing, but he turns out to be a bad person and he harms people, and pretty much he sees himself against the world, and so he kind of blames himself for his troubles. And so I look at that, and it tells me, all right, these are your two options. You can either overreact and it doesn't do you any good and you can blame everyone else for it, or you can just breathe and find a way to turn it around somehow. And so, in answering my question, I'm still figuring it out. Like, I mean, just last night I was overthinking, but like, I've kind of gotten better at controlling my emotions, you could say. But like I said, there's just no way you can ever stop thinking, you know? So every day, you know, some of you I see at the Y, and you guys are always like, bro, why are you always here? Well, I realized that the Y is kind of like my shelter. You know, like I'm there, friends are there, my mentor works there, so I'm always there with him. And so that's just kind of like my safe place. And I mean, y'all can say whatever you want about me, but like, it's just the way I deal with things. You know, there are moments, I'm not gonna lie, where I arrive and I do kind of push people aside. And it's not because I have anything against them, it's one of those days where you just are rough, and instead of me being in a bad mood and talking to those and knowing that I'll probably say something to offend them, I just want to, like, you know, have my alone time. But then again, we all need our alone time at times, so and so yeah, how do we turn it into a coping mechanism? I would just say you just gotta stay busy, because that's what I do. I mean, when I was over there in Mexico, I wasn't doing anything. I was just waiting and pretty much waiting until all this stuff ended, and I wasn't doing anything. And so I was just wanting to come back here. And then as soon as I came back here, you know, I got to school the next day because I was like, well, it'll keep my mind off of this. And then from school I went to the Y, and you know, I just stayed busy. So my suggestion would be just to stay busy, and everything will just work itself out.